Good evening. I'm Lainey Jennings Hall, and you are listening to Speak Up Arkansas on KABF 88.3 FM. Disability Rights Arkansas is proud to be part of KABF's weekly Speak Up Arkansas program to encourage dialogue about the issues that matter most to people with disabilities, their families, and caregivers, and to educate the public about these issues to make Arkansas a truly inclusive state where everyone's personhood and contributions are valued. This show is pre-recorded, so we won't be taking calls, but we always welcome your questions and comments. Give us a call at our toll-free number, 1-800-482-1174, or you can find us on our website, www.disabilityrightsar.org. We're also on Facebook at Disability Rights AR, and you'll find us on Twitter at DR Arkansas. Last month was Mental Health Awareness Month, but our awareness shouldn't end when the pages of the calendar turn. Psychiatric residential treatment facilities, or PRTFs, as we'll refer throughout this show, are long-term residential treatment facilities designed to address mental illness or behavioral health needs for youth under the age of 21. These facilities are intended for long-term treatments, 3 to 6 months or sometimes longer. They are licensed by the state of Arkansas and subject to CMS regulations for use of restraints and seclusion. There are currently 13 different facilities in the state of Arkansas, 5 of which are nonprofit, 8 are for-profit corporations, with over 800 licensed beds increasingly serving out-of-state needs. DRA plays a critical role in monitoring these facilities as the protection and advocacy agency for Arkansas. Today, I'm joined by DRA staff members, Reagan Stanford, the Abuse and Neglect Managing Attorney, and advocate Chris Stewart to discuss their role in monitoring and an exciting new resource that was developed as a result of their work. Reagan, let's talk a little bit about DRA's role in the PRTFs.
So our role comes from our access authority. So as the designated protection and advocacy agency for the state, we have special authority to access locations and records. Without this access, it would be difficult for us to fulfill our function of monitoring for and investigating abuse and neglect in these facilities. So this authority allows us to enter any facility that provide services to anyone with a disability. Providing services to individuals with disabilities does not have to be their primary function. So for example, we're able to go into jails or prisons or schools whose primary function is not providing services to individuals with disabilities, although PRTF certainly that would be their primary function. If we're monitoring, we can enter the facility, access all areas of the facility that residents have access to, and interview residents. If we're conducting an investigation, we can likewise enter the facility, access all areas the residents have access to, interview residents, and we can also interview and talk to staff and request records.
So for our listeners, we are the only agency in Arkansas.
Correct. Yes. Every state has one designated protection and advocacy agency, and Disability Rights Arkansas is the designated agency here in Arkansas.
We are part of a larger organization as well. There are PNAs in all the other states.
All the states and territories. I think there's 57.
So your team, you have a team of 3.
Yes.
So your guys' specific role is monitoring and investigation of the facilities. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And I think Chris is going to help with this also, but PRTFs are one of those that we are monitoring. So on a regular basis, we're monitoring through records or going into the facilities to see what is going on and maintaining a continued presence in those facilities. There are other times when maybe we receive a report or a complaint that references abuse or neglect, and we will go in to do an investigation. So that happens with the PRTFs, but also with other types of facilities that we're involved in, anywhere where any facility that is providing services, and we'll go in and maybe do a very targeted investigation of related to the complaint that we received.
So is there like a checklist? What exactly are you looking for when you go into these facilities?
It varies. So because abuse and neglect is pretty broad, right, in what we're looking for. So it can be obvious abuse, so staff abuse, abuse by other residents, but also within neglect could fall failure to provide treatment, failure to protect, things like that. So it's a pretty broad spectrum of things that we're looking for that aren't specifically like delineated in any statute. So that can be frustrating sometimes for the facilities that we go into because they're used to monitors from the state or other organizations that do have a very specific thing that they're looking for and kind of checking boxes. Whereas our authority is more all-encompassing and we're looking for overall, right? Because also if you're not providing adequate treatment and this person is having to stay in this facility for months or years longer than they should, right? Because you're not providing them adequate treatment, that could be a form of neglect, right? So that's something that we're looking at as well.
We look a lot at medication, make sure the kids are not being over medicated, that they are actually seeing the psychiatrist, and that they are getting therapy and things like that.
What exactly does it look like when you're going into these facilities? What does a visit look like?
We go in to monitor facilities. We usually look for quite a few different things. And some of that, might be just obvious stuff like, are the kids being restrained, which could fall under some physical abuse. We also look at medications to make sure they're getting the medications that they need, but that they're not getting too many medications. We've had some experiences where some facilities are over medicating kids. We've had one in particular where kids ended up in the hospital. And then we've had other facilities that use a lot of chemical restraints. So that's, like giving them shots to calm them down. So we look for those kinds of things, because we don't want the kids being over medicated, and just making sure that they have the services that they're supposed to be getting, which is the therapy, those kind of components. Because like Reagan said, if they're not getting those services, they're not going to make any progress to be able to leave the facility.
We acknowledge that they are allowed to use chemical restraints and restraints in Arkansas, that although some states have banned the use of chemical restraints with youth, Arkansas is not one of those. So we do acknowledge that they, are allowed to use them. However, they're only allowed to use them, right, in very limited situations. So when we're looking at it, we're looking at, are you using it as a means of discipline instead of when there's actually a danger to the child or to other children? Are you not providing other supports and instead and failing to de-escalate situations and then relying on chemical restraints or restraints? Those are the kind of things we're looking at. Not just, is this something that the facility is using, but is it something that they're overusing or over relying on in lieu of providing supports and providing a more therapeutic environment?
And do they get training on these types of actions?
Staff
at the facilities, yeah.
They're trained in whatever restraint method that facility uses, and then as far as like giving the PRNs, that's, the nurse would give the shot.
But it's often the staff certainly the nurse gives it, and, in theory, a doctor's approving it and the nurse is giving it. But the staff that are on the floor is, in practice, generally who's requesting that the nurse requested and, requesting it from the nurse. So, looking at what went on in that 20 minutes before, or, in some period before that happens, because maybe things have escalated to a point where they can't contain this child, or they don't feel like they have any other option. But did they do something, prior to it getting to there to try and de-escalate the situation? Because what we see is often, they're not really trying to de-escalate situations where they don't have enough staff to do so. Right. So like maybe it's clear that things are escalating between two residents, and what probably needs to happen is that one of them be taken off the unit to go cool down somewhere or walk around. But maybe there's not enough staff to do that. So it just continues to escalate, until it ends up being an incident.
Or maybe the staff escalates it because they're not using their training for de-escalation techniques. We've seen that where if staff would have just maybe walked away, left the kid alone, the kid would have calmed down on his own instead of, staying kind of in somebody's personal space and continuing to talking to them when they ask to be left alone. Yeah, they have training. Do they always use it correctly? No.
So a lot of things that you're talking about are you're saying you're going and looking for these things. How are you looking for restraint seclusion? How are you looking if they're over or under medicated? Like what exactly is going on these visits that helps you determine these things?
Some of the kids, just by meeting and talking to them, you can tell if they're being over medicated. If their speech is slurred and they're just really slow. A lot of the kids will tell you, we have a monitoring tool. One of the questions is, we ask about chemical restraints and physical restraints and things like that. From some of their answers that they give us, we get that information. Then we also are able to request records and look through those to see, how many chemical restraints they're giving, or to look for a serious incident report that would, talk about a physical injury or something like that.
So interviewing the clients, the staff, it sounds like a lot of interviews take place on site.
Yeah.
So I want to touch on that a little bit. I know in the past you guys have done some interviews where you speak with the clients and you have gotten phrases from them about their experience in this PRTF, because ideally this should be a therapeutic setting, right? They're going there for, in the perfect world, for help, right? But not the answers you're always getting in these interviews. Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
We get a lot of information from the youth interviews. And that's something that we've learned, that a lot of other people that are going in, and maybe even the state licensing, unless there's a specific allegation about a specific child that they're investigating, they're not interviewing the youth. And they really have a wealth of information. So certainly we're asking them, a lot of questions. If they want to talk to us, they're never, required to speak with us. But we have started asking them kind of, if you could describe your experience here, being here in one word, what would that be? And I think that has led to some pretty powerful answers, and us, being able to use that. That's kind of a very simplistic way of showing other people what this experience is like to the individuals that are, and the kids that are living there.
Kind of hitting right where I would like to talk about. I know you guys have done interviews, you take pictures. I know you specifically have shared a picture that was very strong. It may not appear strong at the first glance, but something that you walked in and there is a little girl's bed. She's got her little dolls on her bed. To me, that was very, very significant.
Yeah, I think that does. We've seen in a lot of these facilities, you can have as young as 6 years old in these PRTFs. So I think a lot of times people think of teenagers or older teenagers in these facilities, but certainly there are much younger kids as well. And I think that really does hit home when you see these beds with their teddy bears or their little dolls and stuff lined up, and they have princess or cars or these little, the rooms, what little decorations they have. They may have a poster of that on the wall, or their bedspread may be that. It kind of reinforces that we're really talking about children here, not just adolescents, not just older kids, but these are children that are growing up in facilities. Because even though it's supposed to be 3 to 6 months, a lot of times it's longer than that they end up in these PRTFs. What we've seen is a lot of these kids are just cycling around through different PRTFs or different facilities. So they're spending majority of their childhood and formative years in these facilities.
So when you say they're cycling through the PRTFs, what exactly do you mean?
We try to track, somewhat as best we can, but also we will run into the same kids. So they may be released from one PRTF to another, or they may get out and go to some other form of home or treatment for a little while, and then they'll end up in another PRTF. I would say Chris can weigh in that it's rare that we come across a child that this is their first placement, or that they've only been in one PRTF.
So why exactly are these kids cycling through? Why, if this is a therapeutic setting and they're supposed to be here 3 to 6 months, ideally maybe longer, what are you seeing as some of the root causes that causes this cycle to happen?
I think there's a few things. One is a lot of the kids are foster kids. And so unfortunately, I think those places are being used as in lieu of foster homes. So if they can get them into a PRTF and they're in a safe environment, then I don't think they care that they're in the PRTF. And then, I hate to say it, but obviously if the kids are cycling in and out of all these facilities, they're not working. So if you keep putting a kid in a PRTF, obviously the last PRTF didn't work, so now you're going to try a new one. I think it's that the kind of the model in itself isn't the best working model.
Right, and that's something that that we're looking at, and certainly trauma and mental illness doesn't have a straight trajectory. So just because a kid ends up in a facility again doesn't necessarily mean that the first one didn't work. But that's what we're seeing is happening, is they're cycling in and out, and they're not really specialized. So it's not that this one didn't work because of, its model, but maybe this other one will. They're all pretty much, doing the same thing. So it really does become just a placement for a child, not the best placement that might help this child. And I think that's something that we're seeing a lot too, when we really dive into particular kids' cases, is seeing very little in the way of trauma treatment and actually getting at the root cause of, what this child has experienced, the trauma they've gone through, and the ways that they may be acting out based on that trauma. We've rarely, if ever, seen that really addressed by these facilities. It's usually more of a just addressing the behaviors and telling the kid how they should be acting, how they should be behaving, and changing that, not ever looking like really getting to the root cause of what has gone on in this child's life to lead them there. And that's something they really seem to be neglecting to look at in these facilities. So we're certainly looking at things like that, and kind of circling back to the monitoring. That's where we look at that too, because there's some facilities, although most of them are not very specialized, that have taken on specialized populations, like kids through the Office of Refugee Resettlement program that did not speak English. There's another facility that is serving deaf kids or kids that are hard of hearing. And so making sure that if you say you're providing all these services, that you truly can communicate with this population. That's something that we can monitor for and look at, if there's a particular investigation, like, are you equipped to completely communicate with this population? Because if you're not, right, then you can't provide services to this child. You certainly can't get into their trauma history and working on their recovery if you can't fully communicate with them. And that's something that I think has been neglected when these programs have chosen to take on these specialized populations sometimes.
So you're telling me what's in the brochure isn't always what's happening in the facility.
Yes, absolutely.
I want to paint a picture for our listeners. I know I have seen some of the pictures firsthand that you guys have shared, because you get these brochures at the facility, and you maybe as a parent are thinking this is, the best option for your kiddo. What are some of the experiences you guys experience walking into some of these facilities? You can see what the brochure looks like. Walking into these spaces, you're seeing the staff that they say that they have. You're in that environment. What is it from your perspective?
Well, certainly the brochures usually look a little bit better than what we come across. So there's one facility in the state that has, I think they house anywhere between 30 and 32 kids on a unit. So I don't think that they would ever put that in a brochure. It'd be like, ooh, we have 32 kids on this unit, while we're going to try to add your kid to that mix.
Because that's a therapeutic setting.
It's not therapeutic. I don't care how you cut it. You can't have 32 kids with those kind of issues all in one spot. It makes for chaos in a whole lot of ways. So like you see stuff like that. Some of the facilities, just the physical environment are not well taken care of, and we get that these kids are hard on property. They're kicking in holes in the walls, kicking out windows and stuff, but that's your job. You took this on, so you have to be continuously repairing your facility. You can't just let it go,
So when you say the physical features itself, I mean, what are you walking in and seeing?
It depends. Like sometimes they'll have a lot of places. I think we went through a spurt where everyone was busting out windows in one facility. So they were, having to board up windows, having to try to reorder them, maybe try plexiglass or something else that isn't as easily busted. There's usually graffiti on the walls. The kids like to write all over the walls. So it's and it's usually not pleasant things that they write. So you obviously need to paint over it. And I guess it's probably a full-time job keeping up with the graffiti people, but you got to do it. They just everything, holes in the walls, you're going to have to patch the drywall. We have been in one place that had ceiling tiles busted out and wires hanging down. So, I mean, we have seen places that to me have like some serious danger issues to just maybe some graffiti on the walls. So it just depends where you're at and what's been going on in that facility.
I would say like a general state of disrepair is how I would describe most of them. And like she said, some of the things are create a dangerous situation that needs to be resolved. Some of it may just seem like it's aesthetic, but that, it matters. That's not all we're looking at, and you can provide good services in a facility that's not, a multi-million-dollar brand new facility. Service is really what we're looking at, but it matters if you're taking care of the building, right? It says something about how much you care about those kids that are coming in there. When they're coming in as a new resident, it gives off the impression of this is what you think they're worth, and this really rundown building that no one has chosen, to make repairs in. And also a lot of the things that it may be the kids, that are messing up some of the things, but a lot of that points to, a lack of supervision and boredom. I mean, the kids are bored out of their minds. Most of the incidents that happen are the things that happen, and the kids will tell you, but you can see, they're bored. They're sitting around on these units doing nothing. They're not being engaged, not only in, therapeutic activities, but in activities at all. So that, this is the result of that, things being, worn down, or them, destroying some of the property. But I would say also, just generally, when you asked about us monitoring, I think chaos is a word that frequently comes to mind. We not only walk through facilities and interview kids, but we do a lot of observation. So just staying on units or staying in areas where the kids are, to just observe the interaction between the staff and the kids, what the kids are doing, what's being offered. So even with us being there, so one would assume that things are better while we're there than not in most facilities. I would say chaos is the first word that comes to mind for most facilities. There's just a general lack of direction and organized activity that's going on there.
And these facilities typically in their brochures or their documentation say that they have certain treatments throughout the day, correct?
They say they offer group therapy and then just regular therapy one-on-one with the therapist. But then when they don't typically say, I don't think in the brochures, like how often or anything. I don't know that they get that specifics. Maybe some do, but yeah, they say that's what they offer, and some of them do and some of them don't. So you have to take into account staff turnover, like therapists. These are things that isn't necessarily the PRTF's fault, but if kid's been with the therapist for a little bit and been making progress, and then the therapist goes out sick, well then that kid's stuck there and has to start kind of all over again with another therapist. So that's definitely going to delay his progress by several months.
I would say that most of the facilities, I think, are intentionally vague and really specifying what it is they're providing, but they definitely give the impression on their website and through their recruiters, and through their brochures, that it's kind of an all-encompassing environment. I think even knowing what goes on inside, when I read their websites or listen to things that the recruiters have said, you feel like the child is going to be actively engaged throughout the day. Like, we understand that a kid doesn't need to be in therapy all day, every day, or even in groups, right? That would get tedious for a child. There needs to be something else, but there can still be planned activities or time for reflection. In a lot of these facilities, the kid is never alone. Like, ever. There's no time for reflection or thinking. They might be getting some haphazard groups. There's, some are led by mental health professionals, some aren't. I think the most we've seen in a facility is maybe 3 a week, and then they get 1 hour of individual therapy a week. I think there's one facility that seems to pretty regularly do 2 hours of individual therapy a week, but all the rest, the most a kid is going to get is 1 hour of individual therapy a week in this inpatient residential facility.
So you guys, you go in, you do your interviews, your reports, and all these things. What action can be taken? What or even time frame for any change to be had? Like, when you guys have created your reports for your monitoring, what happens next?
So I think it depends on the facility. So we usually try to address issues with the facility directly and see how responsive they are to making changes. And there are quite a few that will, at least some changes that they will make, once we address those with them. Sometimes we go into a facility and we feel like it's too much, like what we have seen rises to the level that we are going to also report it to the authorities or the oversight agency for that particular thing. We don't feel like we can only deal with it with the facility. That may, for instance, that happens last year with chemical restraints. There was a facility that was overusing chemical restraints and was using chemical restraints on children that were calm, like unarguably calm, and just sitting there in some instances. And they were using chemical restraints. So we felt like that wasn't something that could be handled just with the facility. So although we talked to the facility directly, and they seemed to understand the gravity of what we had uncovered and appeared to institute, a few changes, things that should have already been being done. we also reported it, to the oversight authorities, and there was, additional investigations, by some of the state agencies that mandated, so they can mandate corrective action plans and cite them in an official capacity, things that we can't do because we are more limited in what we have any remedy available to us that would be available to any member of the public. So we can report it to, an oversight agency or even law enforcement or maltreatment if that's something, that we think it rises to the level of. We can pursue litigation or legal action, but we try to work on the lowest level and work with the facility first, right, to see if they're responsive, to get things taken care of as quickly as possible. Because there's always kids in the facility. So we want things to be resolved as quickly as possible so that, fewer kids are in danger or are being exposed to this practice that we think is harmful to children.
I think it's fair to say you guys have seen your fair share of frustrations with these facilities, not seen and heard and dealt with, which leads me to our exciting news here at Disability Rights Arkansas, our new resource on our website, PRTF Database. Reagan, I know this was kind of been a brainchild of yours for a while. Can you talk about really why you wanted this database and what the goal of it is?
In looking at all these facilities and looking at what the state has and talking to guardians that have placed their kids here, we realized that there's really a gap in the information that is available to the public. Very often, the only thing that the public had access to or knew that they had access to was the websites of these facilities or the recruiters that were telling them, that are employed by the facilities and telling them all these great things about what they can do. And we've certainly gone in and done investigations and things and looked at things. But what we found is that there is a lot of information that is out there that the public just didn't know how to get. And it was in a lot of different places. There's multiple, departments within the Department of Human Services that have oversight of these facilities. There's a contracted agency that does the inspection of care reviews for Medicaid. There's the police that respond, local police departments respond. They often call them at some of these facilities. So we wanted to make all that information available to the public, to those that may be placing kids in these facilities so they can see, what is really going on. That's where it started and we're expanding. But right now, what is on there is all of this information that we have gotten through Freedom of Information Act request. It's all public information, but would have had to have been requested from all the various agencies for someone to get this information previously and look through it. So now we have it all there in one place where you can look at it by facility. So you really have a sense of, although that's not everything, certainly it's not even everything that we have. We're working on some of how to get out some of the information that we get that we don't get through Freedom of Information Act requests, that we get through our access authority. So we'll constantly be, kind of adding to that, but there is enough information that can be publicly accessible to give a better sense of what is really going on in these facilities. And we thought it was important for the public to see that and have access to it.
In these reports, these are not editorialized by Disability Rights Arkansas. These are just the straight reports that you guys are getting from these organizations.
Right. And we certainly, we've written some, reports internally. We haven't published reports, but right now what is on the website, is directly the information that we've gotten either from the Department of Human Services, from local law enforcement agencies, or from AFMC, who does the inspection of care reports. We do summarize some of them, but it's straight from the document, and you can see the actual document, on our website also. So you can see that this isn't, we're not editorializing, we're not putting our slant on anything. This is actually what the document says.
So let's break down the database just a little bit, because it's beefy, it's robust, it's a lot of information. You hit a little bit about where you're getting the information. That's all covered. We include the actual information about these organizations on that database. And then we have the 13 different PRTFs. It's all the information specific to each individual database. So it is searchable. It's all hierarchy by the facility itself. One thing I really want to hit on that is a most recent ad is at the top of each facility. Reagan, do you want to talk about the description section a little bit?
Yeah, we added recently, a short description section at the top of each PRTF, at the top of their page, that can give some, basic information about, where we didn't put, although it is public information where they are. We just put the city that each facility is in. But the capacity, the age that they take, different treatment modalities that are offered, how many therapists they have, and how many individual and group sessions they offer. Because this is information that the public should know, especially people that are considering placing a child in one of these, but has been difficult to get, even for us sometimes. And a lot of the facilities are intentionally vague, and they'll say things like, we offer, individualized treatment and a range of treatment modalities, right? But when you really dig down into that, a lot of them are only offering CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, or maybe trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, which may work great with some kids, but can't be or shouldn't be the only thing that you're offering, right? Everything doesn't work for everyone. And so really trying to make that, pinning the facilities down on what is it that you're actually offering, and then, making that available. That's one thing that we have found, is that no facility is tracking outcomes, right? So no facility is even attempting to track so that they can say that what they're doing is successful. They don't track, any outcome measures for any of the residents that they have. So although they defend their models, they're not attempting to support those in any way with data. So since we can't compare outcomes or look at things like that, we can at least maybe have this information available, because even simple things like the capacity, we have learned talking to guardians that sometimes they don't realize that they're sending their child to a facility that has 100 kids, right? Or like she said, 32 kids to a unit, or they don't realize how many kids there are per bedroom. Or if it's a facility for sexually maladaptive behaviors, that they have more than one kid to the bedroom. They actually have 4 in most of the bedrooms. Those are things that guardians don't seem to always be fully informed of before placing a child.
I think this kind of touches on, we were speaking earlier about what's in the brochure versus reality. And ironically enough, this information is coming straight from them, but it's not what's so regularly available to the public. So I think that this component of it was very important to be added. Let's talk about some other features. It's completely searchable by incident type. Can you talk about some of the incident types that are available for the search feature?
So you can narrow it by, if you're only wanting to look at the how many times the police have responded. So you could, that would be narrowing it by the document, but you could just put police, in the search. Or if you want to see, every time that DHS has been out there or cited them. But you can also search for some, like abuse, right? You could put in abuse and it should pull up every incident that had staff abuse or where abuse was alleged at any of these facilities. I think we're still expanding the search and how you can use that, but certainly some of the simple search terms like that, you can certainly narrow the focus to look at those things.
I think something that's important to add is we added a trigger warning to this, because this is the raw information. We did talk about how this is not editorialized by DRA, but it's also the raw information, and so there are some reports in there and some incidents that are very graphic. So that's something of note for our listeners and for the audience at the PRTF database, that, this is the information straight from the reports.
And there's certainly, I would say they seem to be concentrated in a few facilities, but they've all experienced some staff abuse. So there's certainly reports that are, are detailing allegations of staff abuse, within the reports that we've received. So
got this great resource. We're pushing that out. In fact, this week we're so excited about. But what next? What's next for this database?
I think it's an ongoing. It takes a lot of time to keep it updated. So we will be updating it hopefully monthly with the new reports that we get, and then also hopefully expanding it and having a section that has resources and has links to maybe news articles about these facilities or about PRTFs in general, other resources or trainings related to the topic, to kind of be like a one-stop shop for if you are considering placing a child in a PRTF, what is this? What is that? And what's going on in those? And then maybe, hopefully eventually expanding out to some of the other types of facilities, because although we have focused, one of our focuses has been specifically on PRTFs because of some monitoring and things that came out of there. We decided that that really needed to be a focus. There are other types of facilities. There are acute hospitals where, that are much shorter stay. There are some residential treatment centers that are not PRTFs where kids are, that where they can spend a long time. And there are children with mental illness, with trauma histories, with learning disabilities in those facilities as well. So kind of looking at the full gamut, of what there is, because we want these places to be safe, therapeutic environments if they're going to exist. But we also want the public to be aware of what it is and, be knowledgeable of what it is they're, where they're placing a child and what that child might be getting while they're there.
So I think it's safe to say this is an ever-evolving database. It sounds like kids are continuing to be sent to these facilities. So it'll be inevitable, but more reports will be made. And so more information getting added to the database monthly. So you touched on this just a little bit. You said we have the capacity to report in a lot of ways that the general public does. We do have a section on the database of how to report a concern. What actions can general public make if they're seeing issues or like at these facilities or just general reporting of a concern?
So in reporting to us, anyone that has any knowledge of a facility, certainly firsthand knowledge is better, but anyone that has any knowledge of or concerns about something that's going on in a facility, they can report that to us. Now, it will vary what we are able to do with that. Usually, unless it's something, very egregious, we will kind of encompass that into our monitoring of that facility. And that's something that we'll be on the lookout for. We can, in that form where you can report to us, it is completely confidential. And as part of our the statutes that give us authority, to go into these places and to do this monitoring investigation, it says that we cannot be compelled. We can never be compelled to give the name of anyone who reports or the identity of anyone who reports anything to us. So sometimes we have staff members or guardians that don't want their kid to be targeted, that will reach out to us and give us information. And we completely understand that can be scary, especially if maybe you think your job is in jeopardy for reporting to us. So you can report anonymously on that form. I will say, however, it is usually we have a few follow-up questions at least that could help us, would make the information you're giving to us a lot more useful. It may be things you didn't think to say, or some way we can narrow it so we can actually substantiate the claim, right? So if you are willing to give your name and information, that will never leave Disability Rights Arkansas. Those go directly to me, so it will probably be either myself or Chris that would be the ones that would be in communication with you, and that is it. So we do understand the hesitation, but if you would give us your name and contact information, it really helps us in being able to use that information that you've supplied.
And we've also provided the information to report in 2 other ways as well.
So on our website is also the link to the Placement and Residential Licensing Unit, is the unit within the Department of Human Services that is what people would refer to as licensing. So they are the agency that's over the minimum licensing standards for Arkansas. So they would be who you would report pretty much anything that goes on. I would report, if you're willing to report to a state agency, I would report to them. We also have a link to report to the Office of Long-Term Care, and they are within the Department of Human Services also, and they are who implement the CMS regulations in Arkansas. So they handle primarily restraint and seclusion issues. So if there's anything related to restraint or seclusion or an injury and a restraint, anything like that, I would also report that to the Office of Long-Term Care.
So these concerns, and we talk about this a little on the website for reporting in general, can include possible abuse, lack of supervision, inadequate staffing, unsafe or unsanitary conditions, use of physical and chemical restraints, medication concerns, and treatment concerns.
But if there's something else that we haven't thought of, but since we do have a pretty broad scope, and maybe you're reporting something and that will tip us off to, maybe something else that's occurring, but anything that's a concern, it's certainly, worth reporting. And then, whether we may be able to do something directly related to that, to that complaint or not. If we have your contact information, we would be able to, to follow up with that and let you know if that might be something that we'll be able to use or not.
We talked a little bit about how to report a concern if we're seeing something within the facilities, so you know or you suspect that something is wrong. But what about the general public? What can they do regarding PRTFs?
I think they can, reach out to other professionals that that might be people that are referring people, kids to these facilities, and to legislators or policymakers, to make sure that they're educated, maybe direct them to the website or to disability rights, to make sure that they're educated on what these facilities really are, what they're providing, and how much they're being reimbursed for those services that they are or say they are providing. Because there's a lot of money flowing to these agencies and a lot of stock being put in what they claim to be providing to kids that may not really be being followed through on or provided to the kids. That's something that I think all of our legislators and all of our policymakers need to be aware of, so that we can kind of work together to make sure that these facilities are held accountable and have high enough regulations that they can be a therapeutic environment where we can refer kids.
Absolutely. Thank you, Reagan and Chris. Yes, Mental Health Awareness Month has passed, but awareness is still vital. As kids continue to cycle through these psychiatric residential treatment facilities, it's inevitable that more reports will be generated. Each month, we will add new and updated reports to the facility section of the database. We will send out these updates on our social media as well as our email list. If you want more information on psychiatric residential treatment facilities, check out our Speak Up Arkansas archive page on the website. In episode number 12, DRA staff Thomas Nichols and Reagan Stanford do a deeper dive into the PRTFs. A video series on restraint and seclusion can be found on our YouTube channel as well. If you have a concern, you can call our toll-free number 1-800-482-1174 or visit the How to Report a Concern page on the PRTF database. You can submit a confidential form to DRA, as well as report to the 2 state agencies that Reagan mentioned earlier. This radio broadcast will also be published on our website alongside the show notes with any links mentioned in today's show. Make sure to check it out. Thank you for listening, and remember, speak up, Arkansas.